welcome and thank you guys for listening. I'll get going on this and kind of go through kind of what elements I see are necessary for a feasibility study, why to do them, and what's involved in them, how long do they take, and again, there's a lot of things that could go into a feasibility study that, you know, go deeper and deeper into it. And is it for commercial property, vacant land, single family home? But primarily what I see is for, you know, single family land properties, but this works for other things as well. So I'll get going. You're welcome to ask questions. I may not see them, especially if they're in the chat, but I'll save time at the end for questions too, but feel free to jump in. You just may have to raise your hand or flag me or just jump in and I'll answer specific questions as we go.
Perfect.
So feasibility studies, and I just created this word ZATTSSUM, ZATTSSUM. Just something as they kind of came up when people asked me, well, what is feasibility and what does it involve? So it's just a little acronym and we'll go through each of those elements. And so, you know, it's zoning, access, title, topography, soils, sensitive areas, utilities, and then a market study. And we'll dive deeper into each of these, and I'm sure you've run across them as brokers that people ask about it, or you've seen variances requested or issues where people purchase property and then an issue pops up later. And you say, well, what do I do now? Or how do I interpret this? So I think every buyer, seller, broker, investor should kind of understand these different elements when looking at a piece of property to help them evaluate the property and avoid making major mistakes. So, you know, first part is zoning. You know, we've all seen, you know, something zoned residential or industrial or retail. And I get questions all the time from people that, you know, well, can I change the zoning? What kind of variance or rezone can I go through? Or what does it mean I can do in this zone? And I generally direct everyone to the permitted use table that every city and county will have for their own jurisdictions, and they'll be different. And here on the right here shows kind of an example one from, this is a Pierce County table, and you'll see the different zones. This just happens to be for a report I did recently in Pierce County where it was rural zoned, and you can see in the R10, 20, and 40, you know, the different uses, and they'll be for residential and a different chart for retail, industrial, commercial. And you're going to look, you know, when you find your zoning, and then come down here and look to see what ones are allowed. And the P generally is going to be in a permitted use. It's an as of right use. So in this rural zone, you know, single family detached homes are permitted use. There'll be other things like you'll see for conditional use, or maybe an A for, I want to kind of work with what is allowed in the property.
What?
Rather than having to lift to go uphill to try and change the zoning. So a lot of times, so a lot of times people will want to do something like, say, a senior housing project, you know, in a zone that's, you know, R10 or R20. It's just not a permitted use. And in a rezone, I'm working on one right now, is going to be long, expensive, and definitely not a given you're going to get that to be a change in use. So I'd rather avoid those. If I'm looking for property, I want to look for something that is a permitted use rather than a conditional use or some sort of change in zoning use. And graphically, you can see, you know, how even a property that may have a certain zoning right across the street could have a completely different zone that something else is allowed in. And so I hear all the time, well, my neighbor can do this, or right across the street, this is allowed. And then sometimes things were done, zoning's changed since someone else did something. And once or twice a year, this happens where someone brings me a property that was never really a legal lot to start with. And they've got a tax parcel number, they've got a title report that they purchased the property. And I'm dealing with one right now where I did a feasibility study. Someone paid, you know, $225,000 for a lot to build on. And I found out it was illegally subdivided. You know, 10 years ago, someone segregated it, got the county to give them a tax parcel number, and it's been sold twice on the MLS. And this poor buyer, has an illegally created lot that is not entitled to a home site because the primary home site's already on the adjacent property that this came from. Now, there's a process to go through for, innocent purchaser that I'm going to help them with, but man, it's just starting uphill right away. And how would you know that it was an illegally created lot? Well, there's certain things I might look for, but they're really unusual, but they pop up. And again, in a feasibility study, these are part of the things you would look for to see if you might find an issue with it. So there's a lot that goes into zoning, but that's kind of the first element that I take a look at to kind of figure out, how challenging is this property going to be. The next thing for A is access. And, certain properties sit right on a county or city road, and it's easy that you're going to drive right off to, like lot A. But sometimes you get that lot B that's in the back, and sometimes there's a recorded easement across A that allows you to go across it. And then you have to look at, well, what does it allow? What if B wants to subdivide? Do they have the right to subdivide and B and use that for multiple lots? Was it just for access and not for utilities? So you don't have the right to bring additional utilities, or maybe you have to widen it. And other things is, a lot of times you have to look at site distance. So you come out from B onto the road out there. I have to look at, figure out if we need to get a site distance study done, so you can see if you have the proper entering and stopping site distance to build a home. So access often is very easy to kind of figure out pretty quickly, but other times we find out that it's not so easy, and that we're going to have to relocate it or get an easement recorded in order to get the access for the property we want where we want it. We've all dealt with title reports, and we've looked at them. We talk to our clients through them and help them figure out, okay, what's recorded on the property. And sometimes there's something in the title report that if I'm going to go develop this property, that may make it really challenging to. I'm dealing with one right now that someone has the area and width to subdivide, but the property is in an open space classification. They've got their property taxes reduced, which is a great benefit. It's a good program, but in order to do it, they have given up their right, or at least they've restricted their rights to develop the property further. And so now we're looking at, do we want to pull the property out of open space taxation, and we may have to pay 10 years of back taxes in order to subdivide the property and to go that route. So it's kind of a tug and push and pull on what to do there. I know that I was here in your guys' class a few weeks ago with Brenda's class on ADUs, and we were talking. The topic came up about certain things about doing accessory dwelling units. Maybe there's something recorded from an old homeowners association that wouldn't allow the lots about a minimum lot size. Maybe you cannot do an ADU on the property because something in the old covenants restricted your ability to do so. And if you're looking at a property where you want to do an ADU or DADU, that this would prevent it or restrict it. So going through the title reports, and sometimes we'll find things like a latecomer's charge, and I'm not sure if people have dealt with that before, but maybe the sewer is right out in front of your property, but you find something here that talks about a latecomer's charge that in order to hook up to it, you may have to pay that assessment off to have the right to hook up. So I'll take a break for a moment on zoning, access, and title and see if there's any questions on those. We'll go through the others, but sometimes I blow through these and someone has some property they've dealt with or a question about one of these. If not, I will continue on. What?
Hold on, Jeff. It's your turn.
Oh.
You said it's hard to do the rezoning. Does it take a long time to do it?
Yeah, generally rezoning a property is going to be, there's a couple processes to do it. And the complexity of it is going to depend upon what you're doing and what else is going on. So for example, they wouldn't want to spot zone a property. So if this property here wanted to change to a zoning that wasn't consistent with anything around it, it would be really complicated because they don't like to spot zone a property. So with zoning, first I'm going to look at what the current zoning is, and then the next thing I'm going to look at is kind of the comprehensive plan. Under growth management, our cities and counties look ahead in the future and plan for the future. So sometimes the comprehensive plan may look to want to change a group of properties to a different zoning. And so maybe I don't comply with zoning now, but I'm going to be compliant with what they want to do in the future for comprehensive planning. And certain things they're just not going to allow. They're not going to, if this is a residential zone and you want to put an industrial site right in the middle of it, those are one of those that it's just probably not going to be consistent or get any support. But you can do it. You can, I reached out to King County on the zoning for one, and they didn't allow it under what we wanted to do. So they gave us a chance to go kind of the comprehensive plan they update every, year or so. They also told us they didn't support in my client's case and in what we were doing, the ability to go through it. So it was probably going to take us 1 to 2 years. And at least in the case I was working on, had a very low probability of getting the zoning change because we weren't consistent with anything around us or what the county wanted to see occur in this area.
Yeah, sorry.
Jeff, Brenda
Yep.
here. Quick question. Are you following what's going on at the state with potential zoning changes for single family housing? And could you kind of explain to everybody how that might affect how we look at properties?
Sure. So there's a couple things from, like lot splitting, and some ability. Right now, if you look at Seattle, like of the residential zone property, I can't remember the exact figure, like, 75% of all the residential zone property in Seattle is zoned kind of single family residential, where you're going to get, a detached single family home on a lot. And so a lot less would allow, something like a duplex, triplex, or, a fourplex on a property. And so there's discussions in places like, Oregon or Portland that just allow a duplex or triplex or fourplex on residential zone property as a base density, opening potentially all lots up for, having more than one home on it. We'll hear a term missing middle housing quite a bit, where we think of, a certain type of housing. We have the high rise multifamily, and we have kind of single family or duplexes, but we don't have a lot more of that fourplexes and eightplexes and stuff like that. So a way to kind of meet some of that need, as others will say, our zoning, and like in Seattle, was done in the 50s or 60s, which was probably adequate for Seattle at the time, but so much has changed, and we're so far behind in the housing needs and supply for it. So if the state would preempt cities and other counties that may not, they want to keep local control of what they want. So, if they could allow every lot to be split into two, or if you allowed every lot to have a duplex, triplex on it, there's been those discussions for a while, and condo reform and having ADUs is just as a right, in jurisdiction. So if those go through, and there's different versions of what people are talking about, would increase the housing supply, take local control, maybe away from the jurisdictions in some regards, and allow just as an as of right use on the property. Did I get that, capture that?
Mm-hmm.
So stay tuned, because we've been talking about this for years. It's gathering steam and momentum as just the affordability issues getting increasingly hard. We're talking about, the homeless issue, and just, workforce housing, missing middle housing. These are all kind of small little tools with which to try and address some of that. Okay, I will jump on to the next. So the next T in ZATTSSUM is topography. And, you know, we live in a beautiful area around Seattle, and, you know, it's lovely for many reasons, but we also have, you know, hills, streams, Puget Sound, lakes, and I'm a third generation dirt contractor. We started with 2 horses and a flatbed wagon in the Kent Valley, and my family's been hauling dirt ever since the 40s. So we've reshaped a lot of the area around, you know, Kent and Seattle with you know, excavations we've done, but moving dirt's expensive. And you may have steep slopes that prevent certain things, and maybe there's rock underneath it. So, you know, how do you go about adjusting the ground to make it work for a home or a new community? And again, I sometimes I'll say, where with enough money, I can probably reshape most anything, but you know, how expensive is it going to be to do, and does it make financial sense to do it? So, you know, I quickly am, if I'm going to look at a site, I'll quickly kind of go to, you know, IMAP on King County. I'm guessing most people have seen that. Different cities and counties will have their own GIS system, but, you know, for properties in King County, I'm just going to go to IMAP really quickly and look at, you know, I think probably most people have seen the topography lines on a site. Depending on the size of the site, you can see that, you know, everything along this contour here is at kind of 600-foot elevation. And as we come up here in these 10-foot increments, we can see this is 650, and just kind of count to come up here. And, you know, the tighter the lines are together, the steeper it is up or down. And the further apart between the lines, the flatter it is. So, you know, we can, you know, quickly get an idea, you know, how steep or flat a certain area may be. And sometimes you want a little bit of slope so water runs off, but you don't want too much, or you're gonna, you may have different challenges. And then a lot of times I'm gonna look at a piece of property, and maybe I'm limited to not doing a certain amount of grading. If it slopes down from the road, you know, I may be looking, I'm going to go to a client and say, well, you've got a very good daylight basement lot, because the ground naturally slopes from the road down, and it's going to work great for it. You know, if it sloped up from the road on a single family lot, you may just naturally have a tuck under lot. And so sure, I could try and go grade that and build walls, but it could add, you know, a significant amount of money onto the cost of developing the land. So the first thing I'm going to look at, can I work with what is there? And then second, if I want to reshape it, you know, how much will it cost? And if it's rock, you know, solid rock underneath versus, you know, glacial till versus sand and gravel, again, will just be parts of and challenges with a particular lot that you'll look at. And the other thing is, people ask, well, how can I trust this? Well, you know, it's, you know, decent, but if you look at even here on something really on here, it has 10-foot, a difference of 10 foot between them, and 10 feet on a small residential lot could make a big difference. So, you know, in the end, we're going to eventually want a survey to look at a piece of property, but do you want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 under feasibility for a single family lot? Well, you know, again, while you're under feasibility to figure that out, you know, I'd rather avoid that till later, till I've waived feasibility, and then look and see, you know, okay, now that we want, you know, we're past that, then we'll go spend the money. But a lot of times people will come to me with 3 or 4 or 5 properties they're looking at, and they don't want to go spend, you know, $5,000, $10,000 of feasibility on each of these properties. So can we quickly look at the property and figure out the challenges that are there?
Does that cost to do what you just asked? I would
Hello, Jeff?
Oh, there's a question?
yes, please. If I had a client, how much would you charge them to do just that, to look at 3 or 4 properties and do exactly what you just said?
Part of it comes down to like, if I just do like a quick deal, I mean, if someone wants a report, most reports I'd say 80% of the reports I do, which would include this whole thing I'm going over today, most of those reports, probably 80% for a single family lot, run between $1,000 and $2,500. Kind of depends upon the number of questions we need. And but a lot of times people will come to me with a bunch of properties, and I'll walk them through quickly how I look at it, and then they do it themselves. So they don't bring them to me, because I'll end up throwing out, usually 2/3 of them pretty quickly, because they just don't make sense. There's some fatal flaw I've found in it. So sometimes we'll start up maybe an hourly charge just to go through it. But then if we want to get a report, then I kind of look at what's needed and able to give a price on it. But again, probably 80% of the ones I look at are, for my time, $1,000 to $2,500. And I always tell people, I'm not a surveyor, I'm not a wetlands biologist, I'm not an arborist, I'm not a geologist, so I can't, do those things. We would have to sub out for, again, a survey or those. I help people find the right person to do it, but I am not an expert in any of those. So, that outside work would also be added on to whatever the cost is. So using free GIS like this really helps on the initial feasibility.
Perfect, thank you.
And then what's below the surface? So, the soils, will the soils below the surface support, one, a building, and two, do we need drainage? Is there adequate drainage for, stormwater? If it's a rural property on septic, is it going to perk? Being a 3rd generation dirt contractor, I've seen a lot of things buried. I've dug up car bodies, old oil tanks, things like that we have to deal with. I remember back in I'll date myself, but back in the 80s doing the Seattle PI building down on the Seattle waterfront, when we were building that, we found an old garbage dump. And I could actually, as they were excavating for what's now the PI building, they dug out stacks of old newspapers. I could just peel a stack of newspapers back from the 1890s and read the newspaper. But had they built that building right on top of the old landfill, it would have just settled and had differential settlement. So a lot of times people back in the day just buried things or filled things in it, maybe a flat piece of property, but they don't, if we were to put something in, as a contractor, I'd have to put it in a 12-inch lifts of dirt, compact it to 95% compaction. And a lot of times back in the day, someone just dumped 6 feet, 4 feet, 12 feet of fill in to level out their backyard. But building on it now would just, the building would sink or settle. And so you could get the cracks in the walls and the foundation going. And so maybe we have to dig all that back out, lay it back in lifts. So you're going to get someone to go out there and dig some test pits on the property. Again, when do you do this? There's a lot of things that go into feasibility. I can look at some, things from a general area that says in this area of Seattle or Kent or Auburn or Kirkland, the soil is generally this. And so we'll know that generally maybe there's sand and gravel out in the area, but on a specific site, someone could have filled it in. So there's no way for the larger maps to know it and to know that, again, what we can do with it. And we have a lot of glacial till around this area, which is really good to build in the summer, because you could set it up and it's going to be a great building material, but just a little too much water takes it out of its optimum moisture content range, and it pretty quickly becomes soupy, muddy mess. And so, if you have that soil type, we would know that, hey, we may not want to be dealing with this property during the winter. Summertime, great, we can use this material, but you start to turn into the winter time, and all of a sudden I have to export this material off the property, pay X number of dollars a yard to have it hauled out, and I got to haul dirt back in. And so I've just added $10, $15, $50,000 to the cost of a single family site, just because the soil may not be good to build in the winter versus the summertime. Or you dig in and you found an old oil tank that leaked. A lot of the areas, in Seattle and the east side, the homes had oil tanks on them. And did they get decommissioned? And if so, was there any spill around there? Maybe it's not even on your property, but your neighbor's property had an oil tank. that leaked and came onto your property, and you have to remove that soil. So, and then with stormwater on the property, if you get the you'll hear impervious surface, anything that gets covered by roof or pavement, water may have used to be able to go through the soil into the ground, into the aquifer, but now because you have a hard surface there, it can't. And we have to figure out how to handle that stormwater. Maybe it's going to go into a rain garden to go back in, or into the public storm system. But can the property infiltrate? And of course, if it's septic, if you're on that, will the property perk? I had someone come to me with a property they bought in Issaquah, or outside of Issaquah in King County, but next to Squaw Mountain, and they paid $300,000+ for the property, and figured out the property wouldn't perk. So I told them, congratulations, you just bought recreation property. So you can, it won't support a septic system on the property. I don't know why you bought it and didn't do a perk test, but there was a limited amount we could do more for commercial use. So on a commercial property, we could do a tank that would get pumped without a drain field. But the limited uses, go back to the permitted use table, I could do like a doggy daycare, right? So if we needed a doggy daycare, that could have worked there, but because of other wetland issues, it didn't really work. So had they spent the $1,000–1,200 to get a perk test done before they bought it, they would have saved themselves. They were $400,000 into it by the time they found me to go try and help to figure it out. So saved $1,000, lost $400,000, and it's still sitting there. And I think they're just going to donate it and take the tax write-off, which is they're not happy about.
It's not easy to donate.
Sensitive areas. Part of the wonderful area we live in with the hills and the streams is a lot of wetlands and streams on the property, and how far we may have to set back from a stream and a wetland or other habitat area. I mean, in Thurston County, it's the western pocket gopher. We don't have to deal with it in King County, but the western pocket gopher is kind of like, I like to say, kind of like the spotted owl was maybe to the, back in the 80s to the timber people. I dealt with properties there, and every mole hole, or not mole, but pocket gopher hole we found, we had to put a radius around it. We couldn't build. And you have to do studies at certain times of the year. So that was it in Thurston County, but what is in a different county may have a different critical area that we're dealing with. And whatever your neighbor may have done may have been what the codes were 5, 10, 20 years ago, and you may have a buffer that is different from your neighbor. And so, again, I tell people I'm not a wetlands biologist. I can go to different cities and counties will have their own maps that kind of show what's, either likely, maybe it's been mapped, or maybe it's a potential area, because they're using GIS to kind of, if you, even if you didn't have this blue line in here, you would have slope coming down from 2 different areas, and you might guess that if water were to accumulate somewhere between hillsides, that's probably where it would be. And so, they actually have this lighter blue line, which I think is just showing that they think it would be there. And then this dotted line is on a different layer that was clicked on that shows that someone actually went out and found this to be here. So, if we find this, then we know it's here. We'd have to figure out what the setback would be from this particular stream, and if there's any other wetlands. So on this property, we have some steep slope issues. We have a stream issue. This is showing a notice on title. I don't know exactly what that would be, but if I'm looking at properties around here, and this is a King County map, to see a lot of this, I would know that I should probably go investigate, this property. This one actually showed nothing on it for King County, really, other than maybe a little erosion hazard. But by the time we studied it, we actually found there were quite a few critical areas on the property that we had to stay away from. I'm dealing with one right now, and one of the critical areas is a cemetery. It's a cemetery that was from I think the 1800s, when you could, it was easier to open up a private cemetery, and it's on the property. And so the question was, how far do we stay away from gravestones? And so, I mean, something I don't usually have to deal with, but I actually used to own a private cemetery in Ravensdale that when I bought this large piece of property, I wasn't aware it was there, but, soon found out that, I got all the old maps and figured out where it showed old gravestones were and then marked them off and put it into a tract. But all these sensitive areas, erosion hazard, floodway, flood zone, streams, they're all going to have different impacts that pile up on each other. That could reduce the buildable area of the property. So usually at this point, people have dealt with wetlands or critical areas and they have a question. Does anyone have a question or example on sensitive areas that they've dealt with? All right, we'll move on to utilities. And this gets critical with, we dealt with, septic. Obviously, if you have to do, that you don't have public sewer in the area, that, septic is one you're going to have to go do perk tests on. Private wells are another one that, again, if you're in the rural area, is it going to be served by public water and sewer or by a private well? I love the ability now to use Google Street View. I used to have to drive out to a lot of properties and obviously if I went and looked at a property, I'd have to go, where's the water main? Where's the sewer at? How close is it? And I have a listing I'm working with right now where there's a sewer main right in front of our property, but the jurisdiction cannot tell me whether we have the right to connect to it or not. And so, normally I would have just gone out there and said, okay, there's a sewer manhole. I was concerned that just because of the sewer manhole, my property is lower than that. Sewage and water wants to go downhill. So I have to now figure out whether, because of the height of my property, even if there's a sewer main out front, can I get the sewer to flow down or can I pump up to it? Certain jurisdictions will allow like a grinder pump to the sewer and other ones won't. I dealt with a property in Covington. Last year, there's a sewer main that is 2 properties over, less than 100 feet away, but it's slightly uphill from ours. And so we asked if we could pump up to that manhole, and the jurisdiction said no, they do not allow any pumps. So the neighbors around us were all on septic. We asked if we could do septic, and they said no, we can't do septic because there's sewer in the area, but they're denying us the right to pump up to it. They said we could connect to the next nearest sewer, and so they said sewer's available. And this lot was only listed at like $160,000 for a single family lot. The next sewer to the property is 5,300 feet away. That is a mile of sewer to put in for a single family lot. And they estimated, the sewer department did, at $780,000 to connect. And so, I don't know why my client bought the property when they did. They didn't check on the sewer. They probably went and looked and saw a sewer close by and figured it would work. Their idea was bigger fool theory. Let's list it and see who will buy the property. And, we did disclose on the issues and discounted the price, but it's going to be, that property will probably sit there for the next 5 to 7 to 10 years waiting for maybe others to bring the sewer in closer to this property. So, we like sewer and the availability to do it. And I saw a property that was listed here recently that's right along a sewer main in a city, but it's across the street is in the county. And so that's the urban growth boundary, and the properties on one side of the street can connect to the sewer. The ones on the other side of the street are not allowed to connect to the sewer. And the listing said sewer available. And I saw people that had multiple offers on. I had a client that was interested in it, but I called the sewer district and found out that this property was not entitled to connect to it. And so to me, the property was worth a quarter of the listing price. And they had multiple offers, from what I heard, at or above the listing price. And someone's going to find out that they're thinking they can connect to the sewer when they can't. And the lot is too small to put septic on. So those people are going to buy a recreational piece of property and wait for, I don't know what to occur for it to make sense. So with our utilities, we'll often say wet and dry utilities. The wet utilities, water, sewer, storm, and then the dry utilities, the phone, cable, internet, power. And so each of those have their ability or their challenges to get the utilities to the site and the cost to do it. And then finally, we'll get to kind of, the market study, which brings everything together. I tell people with enough money, I can make almost anything happen. And often I tell people don't do a project because I've now looked at it, an example of what it may cost to build. Another property that I had a client, I don't know why they purchased it in nearby Issaquah, and there was only one area on the site to develop for a home site, but that's also where they needed to put the septic. And so the analysis work back was I could sell the home. This isn't an example of it, but a different one. I did an analysis like this of all the costs that a builder could build a home there and sell it for, I think I'd had it at 1.8 million for the finished home. But in order for the builder to do that and break even, if they sold at 1.8 million, the seller would actually have to give them the property for free. And in fact, to break even, they'd have to give them the property for free, and write them a check for $25,000. And this is a property that the buyer had spent $290,000 to buy, and then another $100,000 in studies. So they were almost $400,000 into it. And this analysis said, you have to give it away. And in fact, the builder wouldn't do it for no profit. So I said, they're probably going to want to make 15%. So you probably have to give the builder the property and a check for $150,000 or $75,000, whatever it was, which obviously the seller was really upset. But what happened in that case was the wetland mitigation fees. In order to do this, we could develop the property, but the wetland mitigation fees were going to be $720,000 to do it. And these were by doing buffer and wetland improvements elsewhere on the property. So, again, with the market analysis, I don't know that many brokers would have done something like this. And so going through, and this is only a portion of what this particular one would look like for a lot, on all the costs to do the site work, the permits and the fees, the indirects. And this is what a builder would look at to come back and do. And so this is actually an assignment my students have to work on for their final this quarter. And this is an example from one of the lots that at the list price and everything they have, this builder, if they did this property, they'd end up with a 3% profit margin. And so it doesn't work. So their challenge will be to go back through and figure out whether they can get more for the price of the home, if they think they can build it cheaper per square foot, if they can renegotiate the list price of the property to figure out how they can get an acceptable percentage of profit. So that's kind of running through, as I say, ZATTSSUM, ZATTSSUM, and to kind of figure out what goes into a feasibility study. I guess it's part of what I do. So I'm a land use consultant. And so a lot of times I've helped people purchase, develop, entitle, and sell 1,000 acres of land in King and Pierce County and 1,000 more statewide. I had got my master's in construction management and then a master's in real estate for the UW. And then they asked me to come back and to teach. So I teach real estate market analysis, real estate development, transaction law, public-private partnership for the UW. And we actually produce a number of videos. If you go onto YouTube, you'll see a lot of ones we'll do. This is a great one, and Brenda will recognize that, Terrence Wilson did on, ADUs and housing affordability. This is one that walks people through, a lot of what we just did, going through on King County IMAP, clicking on things to figure out how to figure out the topography, how to click the layer that will show wetlands in critical areas. And then we have other people that come on. This was Brent Beardall, CEO of WaFd Bank, and he talked about, you know, kind of changes in the banking industry. So this is just kind of a something that we do at the UW for kind of fun, but also for education. One thing that I talk about in feasibility is that, you know, people will ask me, you know, and the question came up like, how much should it cost? How long should it take? And so if you know, brokers will call me and ask me all the time, you know, how long should I ask for feasibility? How long, you know, the seller only wants to give a week or 2 weeks, or, you know, what's the right amount of time? And I say that the, you know, the time and the cost of feasibility should reflect the number of questions that need to be answered. We're never going to have perfect information on a site. We're always going to have more questions because we just usually, if we study it forever, someone else will have bought the property. And so, you know, we want to know, you know, do we need to know on, you know, wetlands and stuff? Did the seller, is this a newly created subdivided lot where I've got a water meter box and a sewer stub? I've got 4 corners on the property staked and surveyed. There's no wetlands, no critical areas on the property. I could probably do that feasibility in a day or so, just confirming, going through the title report and maybe with the jurisdictions on setbacks. But if it has more issues, no reports, no studies, it's not unusual for me to need, you know, a 30 or 60 or 90 days. And for me to do my report, I usually say I can do my report within about a week of getting the information to do the report. If we need an arborist, if you're going to do a project in Seattle or Mercer Island, you may find you're going to design your home around a particular tree. And so, you know, what is a significant tree? What is you know, the type of tree? All those things that you may need to get some individual to go take a look at. Once I get that information, I can kind of figure out how much, you know, how sure are we that we can do what we want to do without some fatal flaw. And with the limited feasibility time, we may not know. And some people spend 0 on feasibility. They don't want to spend that money. But I would say relatively, you know, I told you about my time. Feasibility for a vacant lot will run anywhere that a person will spend typically, you know, somewhere between $1,000 and $10,000 for all the reports. Not all necessary, and not all lots are the same. If there's no slope, we probably don't need a survey. Is there any encroachments that may be on the property? You know, we didn't talk about, you know, encroachments, which come up as well. That sometimes comes up on title, but sometimes not. So, you know, I hope that kind of gives you a good idea of what goes into feasibility and what you might ask. So I'll open it up for questions, see if I can field any questions or specifics you might have.
So Jeff, it seems like a lot of real estate agents could probably do the overarching look for the deal killer, make an offer with the feasibility, and then hire someone like you to dive in and dive into more of the details. It almost seems like there's layers that we could do the basic looking at it, but then when you want to get to the details, after you're under contract, they'd hire someone like you.
Yes, yes. And so exactly the reason why I produced this for a lot of my clients was this is a thumbnail sketch that if you go and look with your clients and you just say, you know, again, look at the zoning really quick. Are we compliant with zoning or not? If we're not, we have issues. If we are, we can get by certain things. But yes, you'll be able to go through these. And that video I showed, if you go to, you know, YouTube and just put like my name and vacant land feasibility, here's a video. It's like 17 minutes long, and it kind of runs through if you haven't done it before, or give it to your clients. I give it to my clients so they don't call, they actually have fun. A lot of them love doing this type of thing because they can kind of do it on their own. And then they don't call me as much. And as brokers, you know, you can help guide your clients through it. I would say, so I'm a broker and I'm a consultant, and I wear 2 very different hats. I carry a lot of errors and omissions insurance as my land use consulting company, in case I were to give, I give information, not advice. And I always tell them I'm not a lawyer or financial person. So, consult your lawyer and your financial person. But, I would caution brokers to start giving, advice in land use consulting. So yes, certain things brokers can do, great. The other thing about hiring, there's other people that do land use consulting other than myself. The good news for brokers is we do a lot of the work for brokers. You keep all the commission, and we do a lot of the work for you once you go under feasibility and keep that liability off of you. And lots with your sellers, that people have listings that aren't selling. Maybe sellers should look at this, and they know why the buyer isn't buying the property, or we can reduce the amount of time a buyer will need in feasibility if we have the perk test and we have a critical areas review.
Is there any time you would recommend not doing a feasibility study? If you're buying raw land?
No, I would not recommend not doing a feasibility study. I would not recommend ever skipping one. I never recommend it to a client. I would always at least tell them, I advise you to do one. I mean, some can be pretty quick because the studies are all done or the information's all there, but I would never recommend to someone not to do one. I've been doing this years, and I get surprised on property that I purchase. I'm like, who would have ever have thought that the lot was never legally created 20 years ago? It's been sold 3 times. It has title insurance. So no, I would never recommend to someone not to do a feasibility study, but feasibility studies can be abbreviated.
I have a question. Do you get involved in the rezoning if the seller wants you to get involved in that? And how much do you charge for that if you do it?
I don't have a like a set price on rezoning because rezonings can take years to do. And the one I'm working on now, we basically killed it yesterday. I was trying to encourage my client that I said, I will go down that journey with you, but it's a Hail Mary from our own 10-yard line. But I'll help you try it. So I think after we heard 3 times from the county, it wasn't going to work. They finally decided to quit, and we're only 3 months into it, not a year into it. So if I gave a package price to go for 3 years and then we quit after 3 months. So on something like that, I set more of an hourly rate to help someone to do. And I'll encourage them again. A lot of times I'm encouraging people not to do it because they'll pay me for 3 years and I'm busy. I'll do it with them, but I don't want to overset expectations. Rezones are challenging, very good when you can do them. But yes, I can help people to evaluate or find the information so they can make the decision whether they want to do it. And if they do, I can help them go through the process.
Okay, thanks. Can you put back your information screen? Yeah, thanks.
Oh.
Thank you. I couldn't read the. Thank you.
I always learn something new. Thank you.
Good. I'm always learning something new. And I tell people and with brokers too, that I think I spent $40,000 in continuing education myself in the last 3 years on, getting my master's and doing CCIM classes. Because even though I've been licensed since 1995, I am still learning new things, and I get surprised as different properties come up. They're getting more and more challenging, and there's just a lot of ways to look at something. And I always say I'm never the smartest person in the room. I'm trying to stand next to him or her, because most of the best deals I've been involved with, I found old town sites that were platted in the 1900s and was able to get those lots recognized. And when the county told me, you'll never get those lots buildable, the water line out there was actually a wood wrapped water line. And we were able to get those lots recognized. What they didn't know was I also purchased the 160 acres next door, and I did a boundary line adjustment and adjusted the boundaries of those lots and made 1 acre lots. It's a beautiful community, helped to improve the water line. But what the county fought me on turned it out to be a tremendous, development for our investors, but it was, not doing the way things were done. Like I want to understand all the rules, that I want to understand, what else is out there. Are there exceptions that could allow our development to go through?
Jeff,
There's other things.
You should spend a minute telling these guys a little bit about boundary line adjustments, what it is, and a strategy why you might use it sometimes.
Sure. So, a boundary line adjustment, people think first about if you have a single lot, and often people think about splitting a lot, subdividing it. Sometimes you have, you may see a property that has already like 2 lots on it, or maybe it has a larger lot and a small little fragment of a lot. So if I can go in and find that fragment of the lot, and I did this in several examples where people didn't even know they owned a fragment of a lot, or a road bisected their lot, and I was able to establish a separate lot that they had. And I then, purchased that separate lot from them, got it recognized, and then would adjust the boundary between those lot lines. And I made buildable lots where I could get a second buildable lot. One was a big lot, one was a very tiny fragment of a lot, adjusting between the two of them. And immediately I had, not 100% extra return, but a significant amount more that I could build a second home on, especially if I was able to kind of find it where no one else had it. And the town site was one that was an example of it. So if you see little fragments on a title report, it's just something, again, to say, is there something there that we can explore? Maybe it's not adjustable, but at least look at it and see, when you might do it. And they also work, boundary line adjustments maybe work where you have, a discrepancy or an adverse possession or a encroachment. People end up just adjusting the boundaries between lots. So primarily it was used more of like, kind of correcting or adjusting lots between maybe 2 neighbors, but also, maybe your neighbor has an extra parcel they're not using. You could buy it from them and then adjust the boundaries and make an additional lot on your property for your client.
Jeff, I have a question concerning that. I have a client who has done a boundary line adjustment for a home with an empty lot next to it. However, in Realist, it's recorded as a different city. Where do I go to correct this?
So it's listed, the lot is listed as being in a different city?
Yeah, Kent versus Everett. So it's not that simple.
It's a typo.
No,
Yeah, I would contact probably the assessor or the title company. Again, there should have been the recording of the boundary line adjustment. Someone actually recorded it. I'd go get that original survey,
right.
or whatever document recorded it, and then take it to the assessor and and say that, hey, there's an error here. It's obviously in whether it's Kent or Everett or wherever it is.
Oh, take it to the assessor.
I'd take you to the assessor. I mean, I'd start there, or title. I guess who. So you're saying that's probably when you pull it up, you're pulling it up on Realist. I'd go first to the assessor site, make sure the assessor has it right. Maybe Realist has it wrong. I don't know. I don't know that particular example, but I'd take the error to the assessor if it's wrong on the county site.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I didn't go over time. I hope I answered questions. I'll make these available, the slides, to anyone. So you're welcome to watch them and share them and send them out. So thank you for your time today. You have my information. If you have a particular question, reach out to me anytime. I love doing it. So I get excited to help people figure out land.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We love having you. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
They just have this huge light bulb in front of them.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.